Hello everyone. Thank you for clicking on my channel. Here, we dive into family conflicts and the challenges that come with them. If you've ever experienced something similar, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like the video to support the channel's growth. If there are any mistakes or areas for improvement, feel free to share your feedback in the comments. I truly appreciate you being here and listening. Now, let me set the stage. Michael came back from Vietnam not with medals, but with nightmares. Once a loving father, now a stranger inside his own home. His silence screamed louder than words. His eyes told stories no one dared to hear. As his family slowly unraveled, his son Jack made a choice: to walk away and never look back. But 20 years later, a letter from the past pulls him home, and what he finds will change everything. Michael Foster had always been the heart of his family, the kind of father who tossed a football with Jack in the yard after work, who slow danced with his wife, Linda, to old Elvis songs in the kitchen. But the man who returned from Vietnam in 1975 was a shadow of that man. He stepped off the Greyhound bus in a wrinkled uniform, eyes dark with memories he refused to speak of. His embrace was stiff, his voice quieter. Jack, only 10 at the time, had waited eagerly with a hand-drawn sign that said, "Welcome home, Dad." Michael barely smiled. That night, he sat at the dinner table like a statue, not touching his food. The house that once echoed with laughter now creaked with silence. At first, Linda tried to understand. She'd read about shell shock, watched news clips on the evening broadcast. But no one prepared her for the sudden outbursts, the slammed doors, the glass shattering against the wall, the nights Michael woke up screaming, in a cold sweat. Sometimes she'd find him sitting alone in the dark, cigarette burning low, staring at nothing. Jack didn't understand what had changed. He only knew that his dad didn't want to play catch anymore, that when he laughed too loud or asked too many questions, Michael snapped. "Quiet boy," he'd bark, his voice sharp as a blade. One night, Jack left a school drawing of their family on the table. Michael crumpled it without a word. The distance grew thicker with each passing year. Michael built a shed in the backyard and spent most of his days there, tinkering with tools, lost in the noise of drills and hammers. It became his bunker, his escape. The only rule: no one was allowed inside. Jack once tried, and Michael grabbed his wrist so hard it left bruises. "Don't ever go in there," he growled. Linda began to fade under the weight of it all. She smiled less, aged faster. At church, she wore sunglasses even on cloudy days. Jack knew why. He heard the arguments through the walls. The heartbreak wasn't in the yelling. It was in the silences that followed. And then came the night Jack turned 16. He came home late, reeking of beer, testing boundaries like most boys do. But Michael didn't see a rebellious teenager. He saw something else, something darker. With shaking hands and eyes wild with rage, he shoved Jack against the wall, shouting things that didn't make sense. "You're not taking them. I won't let you." That was the night Jack packed a bag and left. No goodbyes, no promises to call, just a slammed door and the sound of footsteps fading down the street. The house stood still after that, one less heartbeat in its walls. Michael never spoke of it. Linda never asked. The silence, once a symptom, had become the disease. Jack Foster walked into the night with nothing but a duffel bag, $43, and a heart full of rage. The streets of Los Angeles were no place for a 16-year-old kid with nowhere to go. But he didn't care. Anything was better than the haunted silence of that house. Anything was better than the man who used to be his father. At first, he crashed on friends' couches, doing odd jobs during the day and pretending everything was fine. But the kindness of others had an expiration date, and soon Jack was sleeping in a rundown shelter in Echo Park, trading his last few dollars for greasy burgers and cheap cigarettes. The more the city swallowed him, the more he shed who he used to be. He picked up work wherever he could, washing dishes, moving boxes, even unloading trucks in the dead of night. But it never felt like enough. There was always someone stronger, someone faster. And Jack, he was just a kid who didn't finish high school, with no one to call and nowhere to go for Christmas. Then came the darker offers. Quick cash. No questions asked. Just drive this here. Hold that there. Jack told himself it wasn't really crime. It was survival. But as the months passed, survival turned into lifestyle. And lifestyle turned into reputation. By 18, Jack had a record. Nothing major, petty theft, vandalism, loitering, but enough to stain his name. He stopped using Foster altogether. It reminded him too much of the man who'd crushed his childhood with a cold stare and a bruising grip. And yet, as broken as his past was, it followed him like a shadow. He'd lie awake in his dingy apartment, listening to sirens outside, wondering what his father had seen over there, in that war. What had turned him so cold, so scared, so angry? Jack didn't want to care. He hated Michael, hated what he'd become because of him. But sometimes, in his loneliest moments, he'd catch himself staring at old pictures he still carried in his wallet. One of them, faded and folded at the corners, was a photo of the family at the beach. Jack on his father's shoulders, both of them laughing like the world was whole. That memory felt like it belonged to someone else. He tried to bury it all with women, liquor, and distraction. But nothing stuck. Every street felt like a dead end. Every bar a mirror. By 22, he was numb. The anger still burned, but underneath it, a question had started to grow. A simple one, but dangerous in its weight. Why? Why did his father come back a stranger? Why didn't anyone warn him? Why didn't his mother fight harder to hold the family together? The deeper Jack sank, the more that question echoed. And like all wounds left untreated, it festered, until it no longer asked for answers. It demanded them. The call came late on a Tuesday night, from a number Jack didn't recognize. It was his mother's voice, older, thinner, worn like a coat that had seen too many winters. He doesn't have much time, Jack. If you want to say anything, this is it. She didn't say his name. Not Dad. Not your father. Just he. And somehow, that made it worse. Jack hadn't set foot in Bakersfield in over a decade. The roads that once felt like escape now felt like a slow march into a battlefield. As he drove, the desert blurred past, dry and cracked like the pieces of his past he tried to forget. In the passenger seat sat the same worn duffel bag from the night he left. Inside it, a bottle of bourbon, a .38 revolver he hadn't decided what to do with, and a photograph folded 100 times over. He pulled up to the old house just after midnight. It looked smaller now, like time had shrunk in it. Or maybe he had just grown too far from who he used to be. The porch creaked under his boots. The door opened before he could knock. His mother stood there, the same face, but with grief carved into the corners. Her eyes filled with something between relief and dread. Behind her, down the hall, Jack could hear the slow, uneven breaths of a man too stubborn to die quickly. "He's in your old room," she said quietly. "Hasn't spoken in days." Jack walked past her without another word. The hallway smelled like dust and antiseptic. Each step felt heavier than the last. When he reached the door, he hesitated. His hand hovered over the knob. 1,000 images flashed, shouting matches, slammed doors. Nights he cried into his pillow as his father's rage shook the walls. And then, finally, the image of that last night. The night he left. The cold, hard words. "You're not my son anymore." He opened the door. Michael Foster lay in the bed, thinner than Jack remembered. Tubes snaked from his arms. His chest rose, and fell like the ticking of a broken clock. But it was still him. The same jawline, the same furrowed brow, the same silence. Jack pulled up a chair. Saturday. Watched. For a long time. He said nothing. He just stared. But inside something boiled. "I didn't come here to forgive you," he whispered. "I came here so you could see what you made, what you turned me into." The man didn't move. "You broke something, old man. In me. In all of us." His voice cracked. He hadn't expected that. And just as Jack stood to leave, Michael's eyes flickered, opened. They locked eyes for the first time in 15 years. Neither said a word, but something passed between them, raw, heavy, and sharp like rusted glass. And Jack realized this wasn't closure. It was only the beginning. The next morning, Jack woke to the unfamiliar sound of birdsong outside his childhood window. He had barely slept. The weight of the night still hung over him like smoke. Michael had drifted in and out of consciousness, never speaking, only blinking, once, twice, as if he were trying to say something but couldn't remember how. Jack sat in the old kitchen, a mug of black coffee between his hands. The walls were still yellowed with time, and the linoleum floor bore the same cracks he remembered tracing with his fingers as a kid. Everything looked the same, but it all felt so false, like a movie set waiting for someone to yell, "Cut!" His mother walked in quietly, her robe pulled tight. She didn't sit, just leaned against the counter, looking at her son with eyes that held too much. "There's something you should see," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's about your father. About Vietnam." She handed him a small, locked box. Jack recognized it instantly. His father had always kept it on the top shelf of the closet. It was the one thing he'd never let anyone touch. "I found the key 2 nights ago," she said. I think you deserve to know." In the living room, Jack sat on the edge of the couch, hands shaking slightly as he opened the lock. Inside were faded photographs, some of his father in uniform, others with men Jack had never seen. And then the letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age, stained with what looked like sweat, and maybe blood. He began to read. The letters weren't love letters. They were confessions, journal entries written to no one, perhaps not meant for anyone. They spoke of missions gone wrong, orders disobeyed, choices that haunted a man long after he returned. One described a village, a raid, innocents caught in the crossfire. And Michael, his father, wasn't just a soldier in the story. He was the one who gave the order. Jack's stomach turned. He felt cold, betrayed not just by a man, but by the myth he'd built around him. The man who taught him about justice, honor, and right from wrong, had once stood in the middle of hell and chosen wrong. He sat back, breath shallow. It all made sense now. The outbursts, the drinking, the silence. His father hadn't just been angry. He was drowning in guilt. Jack looked at his mother. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She had lived with this truth for decades, carrying it like a hidden wound. "How long have you known?" Jack asked. "Since the day he came back," she replied, eyes wet. But he never spoke of it. He just broke. Jack looked back at the letters. The weight of the truth was heavier than any war story he'd imagined. His father had built walls, not just around the house, but around his soul. And now those walls were crumbling. Jack didn't know if he felt pity or rage, but he knew one thing. Whatever came next would change everything. Jack stood on the porch that evening, watching the sun bleed across the horizon. The letters were still in his hand, ghosts folded neatly into paper. The old wood beneath his feet creaked, just as it always had, but now it felt like a sound from a different lifetime. A lifetime before the lies, before the war, before the silence. Inside, Michael lay in his bed, too weak to sit up, his breathing shallow and erratic. The man who had once towered in Jack's memory now looked small, almost fragile. But the weight of what Jack had discovered made him feel anything but powerless. He'd spent the day drifting between fury and sorrow. At one point, he'd wanted to scream, to confront his father with every word from those letters. But what good would it do now? The man who had written those confessions no longer existed. All that was left was this broken version, haunted, hollow, waiting for the end. His mother came out quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed him one, then sat beside him. "He's dying," she said simply. Jack nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "He wants to see you." "I don't know if I can," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "You have every right to be angry," she said. "But Jack, carrying that anger won't heal anything. It won't change what happened. It'll just pass down." He didn't answer. She placed a hand on his and squeezed. "You don't have to forgive him tonight. Maybe not even ever. But don't let this be the last page of your story." After a long silence, Jack stood up and walked back into the house. Every step down that hallway felt heavier than the last. The air in his father's room was still, like a church before the sermon. Michael opened his eyes. Barely. But they met Jack's. For a moment, they just stared at each other. "I'm sorry," Michael rasped. 2 words. That was all. Jack swallowed hard. "I know." He sat down beside the bed. The room buzzed softly with the sound of an old fan in the corner. Time slowed. Jack looked at the man who had been his hero, his tormentor, and now just a man. "I hated you for a long time," Jack said. "But I hated not knowing even more." Michael blinked. Once. Jack took a deep breath. "I'm not here to tell you it's okay. It's not. But I don't want to carry this anymore. Not this war. Not yours." He reached out and took his father's hand. It was cold, but Michael squeezed back, weakly but real. That night, Jack stayed beside him. And when the sun rose, Michael was gone. But something else had lifted too. The bitterness, the silence, the walls. Jack didn't walk away with peace, but he walked away with truth. And for the first time in his life, that was enough. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling story. See you in the next one.